Hi, and welcome to season 2 of the Technically Creative podcast. I'm really excited to introduce you today to André Vargas. Now, he's not going to like me saying this because he's a very nice, humble man, but Andre might just be one of the smartest men in entertainment. And it's not just because he's brilliant and articulate, which of course he is, but it's because he's architected and runs one of the most sophisticated data tools in global show business. He's the chief data officer at Creative Artists Agency, the largest talent agency in the world, and in many ways, the connective tissue of the entertainment industry. CAA represents artists at the highest levels, and to advocate for them in a world dominated by data-rich giants like Amazon and Apple and Netflix, you need more than just an agent's charisma. You need data, and lots of it. Now, Andre and his team have been using machine learning long before Gen AI became a trend, and they built CAA Intell, a data platform that levels the playing field and arms agents with real-time, multi-dimensional insights, empowering them to advocate for the artists they represent in every negotiation, every pitch, every deal. And from where we sit at Kubrick and Kubrick Labs, we know who's paying lip service to ethical AI and who's walking the walk. And CAA is walking the walk. While much of the industry races to embrace generative AI tools built on unlicensed scrape creative work, CAA has taken a principled stand. They refuse to use AI models trained on stolen content made by the artists they represent. And so in a town where ethics has often been the only dirty word, it's really encouraging to see people like Andre and companies like CAA doing the right thing. This episode is about AI, sure, it's certainly about data. But really, it's about what it means to build technology in service of artists, not the other way around. Like I said, I'm very excited about this episode. Please stick around. I think you'll enjoy it. Andre, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, because I've been really wanting to talk to you I always enjoy talking to you, but I've been really wanting to talk to you on the podcast for quite some time.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This is very exciting. And yes, we've been talking for a long time and can't be more excited than being here with you today and see what we can talk about.
Just to kind of kick it off, I mean, as far as I see it, your role as chief data officer has become arguably one of the most important strategic roles in any modern company. I mean, especially with the advent of generative AI. But, I think that especially a company that sits as a cultural crossroads like CAA and interacts with so many different types of creative data. Can you just take me through what your role is and as well how it's been changing in the last couple of years?
For sure. Definitely interesting times. I came from management consulting, actually building data platforms for big corporations. So it was a little bit of a culture shock for me to enter media and entertainment and see how data was managed here and how analytics was perceived, and especially in the arts and representing artists. The uniqueness on combining that intuition, the understanding of art, the personal relationships, and then how to insert data into that whole process. The world around our industry was becoming more data-driven and technology-driven, given the entrance to the business of entertainment being tech company first. So it's definitely been a challenge, but also a buffet of opportunity, right? So imagine a dream come true to come to a place to build a data competency and capability from the ground up in a very difficult, non-traditionally data-driven environment. It's been nothing but a joy, to be honest. A challenge and a joy. And maybe really important for our conversation, I think, is separating what generative AI is, which is kind of like overtaking the word AI. Generative AI is a methodology inside the overarching machine learning AI ecosystem, which we've been using for a really long time. And if you allow me to tell you like a funny story, it's arriving at CAA, I had to quickly learn that talking about algorithms and statistics and math and regression and dashboards, not really catching fire on my early days of trying.
Just a lot of glazed over looks.
It's like, what are you going to tell me that I don't already know, Mr. Data Guy? But then what I realized is like, okay, I need to change my language. I understand I'm not going to talk about machine learning. I'm not going to talk about artificial intelligence or algorithms. I'm going to talk about how do we supercharge how we serve our clients? How does the company make money? How do we optimize deals for clients? How do we discover the best talent? Rather than talking about the how, I just wanted to understand what's the workflow? How does this company serve its clients? So I never called AI AI. In fact, I came up with this thing called augmented intuition so that I would be able to be welcomed to these conversations about how does data insert itself in that magnificent intuition the agents have and the artists have. They have an intuition that you can't quantify. So I called AI augmented intuition, was very careful, making sure that I would be welcomed in the culture, trying to introduce data. And then ChatGPT comes out and generative AI is everywhere and everybody's calling it AI. And I'm like, oh my God, from one day, AI went from blasphemy to the word of du jour. So that's what happens, always looking for better and improved ways to service our clients. And basically, being the chief data officer, I'm in the nexus of what's going on. So supporting not only the sales side, but supporting our business development people, our corporate strategy. Again, it's a buffet of opportunity. So really exciting for sure.
That sounds like a very Hollywood story, doesn't it? So you've been banging on about something for a long time, then suddenly somebody hears it in the halls of power and you're getting called. Do you know about this AI stuff?
That's right. That's right.
That's interesting that you talk about, how you had to language it, that you had to speak in terms of outcomes rather than speaking in terms of the technology being used. And that's one of the things I really kind of have noticed about you, especially, is that you you're always talking about what it means to the artist. I feel that a lot of agencies pay lip service to it, but then when the rubber meets the road, the people who are really doing that data-centric or technology-centric work sort of start to forget what the overall purpose is. Does that come top down? Is it something that just you really got into your bones quite quickly?
Yes. So it is part of the DNA of the company. We service clients, like that's period, right? So it's in the DNA of the company as a services organization. And I'll tell you another story that hit me really hard, which is what I've used as a North Star, right? So it's a combination of two things. Like where I came from, I always loved Clayton Christensen's jobs to be done theory. What's the job to be done? Let's start with the why and the job that needs to be done versus, hey, here's a tool, where can we use it, right? So I go the other way around. But what really hit me a few years ago before the pandemic, in a company retreat, one of our A-list superstar clients was being interviewed as a guest, right? And I was in awe. We know celebrities by the roles they play on television or movies or when they're playing sports or in music. But then when you see them talk, honestly about their dreams and aspirations and how they build businesses, I was like completely mesmerized by this particular client. But then at the end of this interview, she was asked, hey, so you have the whole company in front of you, right? What is one thing you would like from us? And she said, I want to feel like I'm your only client. And being a nerd that I am, I decided, well, I work for this client, like period. Everything I do and everyone that I interact with, we all work for this client. So whatever decisions we make, what would she think? Does this benefit her? And that helps me combine the understanding that ultimately everything we do is to supercharge the value of a client, the opportunities that they can have with the job to be done. And that combination literally helps drive how we design our systems that supports then the agents, because it all rolls up ultimately in the service of a client. So that's really what helped me and the team that we've built here. We all say the same thing. In fact, a colleague of mine even gifted me a cardboard version of the client that I work for, because I started to tell this story all around and everybody knows who André works for. But it's just
Yes, she watches down from you, doesn't she?
That's right.
Always in your office.
It's the boss.
looking over your work.
I have a little sticker. It says the boss, and in Spanish it says la jefa. I'm a member of CA Latino, so definitely everything is there. As a matter of fact, this client has this story. There's been pictures and selfies sent to her via her agent. Finds it hilarious and wonderful that that's how we serve. So yeah, I think once everybody centers around the job to be done and who do we actually work for ultimately, it bypasses politics, it bypasses everything else, because at the end of the day, who do we work for and what are we trying to accomplish is the North Star.
Well, I think it also humanizes it as well, doesn't it? That reminder that, these are people who have worked very hard for their careers. One of the things I really appreciate about you is that, very often if we were talking about a piece of technology, you would very often reorient me, be like, Orlando, remember, there are people here and these are artists here. And how would you, and with my mother, she was a novelist and she wrote 20 romance novels and they were all in the books 3 corpus. And so when you kind of that orienting thought of, what would an artist say about this? I really respect what came out of that is CAA's overall and your personal approach to the provenance of data that these language models and AI models have been trained on. You guys really walk the walk when it comes to not engaging with models that have the original sin of copyright theft at your heart. It's these artists that you represent, that you have represented for years. It's their work that has been stolen to make these models. And I think that especially the language models, it would have been very easy to train a reasonable model on all of the publicly available legal data and, courthouse data and, all of the language data that was open to the market. But I think that what these models and the people who train them realized was the thing that's going to make people want to enact with them, that's going to make them want to use it on a daily basis is art and poetry and filmmaking and television and literature, and that it's actually the art created by human artists that's going to give it that secret sauce that's going to make people want to interact with them. How do you retain that standard when this technology is moving so fast?
Well, so remember again, who do we work for, right? So great that you framed it that way. And then CAA values its integrity, right? Our North Star in servicing clients means that we have to be ethical in everything we do, right? And we've also been very openly about defending the rights of our clients, right? So I think the solution to this should have been just easily compensation, credit, and consent. The fact that they just took it, I think that's the difference, right? And there is I think over 40 lawsuits going on at the moment around copyright and the defense of fair use versus non-fair use and so on. Then the next part of this answer, I would say, there is a lot of hype around AI, which causes this, you'll fall behind. There is this FOMO frenzy going on. And sometimes you need to also be courageous to be a little bit, okay, well, can we first study this thing and see what is it versus just jumping in the pool? You should just, what is it really? And then obviously looking at the data sets, the pile and the books tree and all of those things, obviously it's a red flag and an alarm in that you cannot be on the side of artists, be ethical, and then also utilize some of these LLMs, right? What CA has done, and you can look this up, there are efforts that we are doing with YouTube, in terms of identifying fakes and helping our clients have those removed, for instance, once identified. And the vault, if you look at CA's The Vault, that is also a way for clients to digitize their image and likeness, voice, and so forth, so that those things can be legally licensed and monetized, right? So I think LLMs per se are unfortunately taking over the word AI when they're actually language models, but there are many things that you can do about it, right? So I think ultimately protecting the rights of clients are the right thing to do. It is a very complex world that we're living in because you can't undo the stealing. I think the tech companies, if they have to, they should settle somehow, right? And pay artists or rebuild all of their LLMs without including copyright material. So who knows what that's going to be like. So that means that we have to be very, very careful when opportunities arise to utilize this technology. Again, what's the job to be done? How does this benefit clients? Does it fit in a workflow? And are there models? And there's, I think, about 4 or 5 now that publicize their training data sets and specifically differentiate themselves by, we don't use copyrighted materials and we respect robots.txt files. And you can maximize the ethics of how these models have been trained, and we'll only utilize those. If that means that they are a little bit smaller, and I believe that smaller models work better anyways, but let's say if my model is not as good as the latest OpenAI model or Claude model, but it gets the job done, I'd rather do that. I'd rather have my data science team work harder to make it work and maintain that integrity and ethics than jumping on the latest version, which, by the way, there's diminishing returns in every new version of these LLMs anyways, as all the data has been already swallowed. So at this point, it's problem solving more than anything else.
Well, I think it's also, understanding that just because the model is large doesn't mean it's the right tool for the job.
Yeah, and one of the advantages we have, as we remember how I had to change the language and how do I embed data in the workflows and how the agents work. That meant that we had to come up with this notion of co-design, right? So we don't just get an idea from an agent and then go into our data lab and come up with a solution, right? So we work really, really closely and together with the agents. So in addition to a smaller model potentially being better, what makes it work way better than a bigger model is that feedback loop that we have with the people who actually are going to use it, specifically to how they want to use it. So externally looking at it, it'll be harder to match how a CAA agent does their work if you don't have hundreds of them providing you continuous feedback on how to improve those business processes. So there is a competitive advantage in actually understanding the use case and the job to be done, and then apply the right tool set to that, right? So it's that way versus you can put an LLM on top of a broken process. It will just amplify the problems of that broken process, right? So you kind of have to fix the process, understand the job to be done, and then apply the right tool for it. Not everything is LLM. That's the issue. It's the frenzy about LLMs is that, we can use AI and let's use AI. It's like, okay, let's answer that question first and see what's the right tool.
Yeah. And you talked about not succumbing to the fear as well. I think that, what's been so interesting about you guys is you've had the bravery to be a bit slow when it comes to making the right decisions about generative AI. But a lot of that bravery as well comes because you've been doing it with machine learning for so long, like CAA Intell, which, I'll ask you to sort of explain it to everybody in a bit. But one time you explained it to me and you said, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, these are tech forward companies that we've been negotiating with for quite some time. If you think that they're not showing up to a negotiation with the receipts and the data that they've prepared, we've had to combat and outfit our agents with that data for quite some time. So yeah, can you talk to us about CAA Intell and what you've been doing and how robust that is from a machine learning perspective?
Totally. So I'm an economist, so I used to work on, operations research, statistics, game theory, and I've never really worked as an economist, but I've been able to use a lot of those ways of thinking to kind of like build the solution that we've done over here. And the main problem that I saw that we needed to solve was this information asymmetry. We call a buyer would be somebody who is looking for the services of one of our clients, right? So if a buyer knows more about the project, the market, the popularity and audiences than our agents do, they are at a disadvantage, right? So, when you're negotiating, or like if you and I were playing poker and I know your cards and you don't know my cards, I'm sure I'm going to bet in a way that I'm going to win, right? Because I know more than you. So there is no perfect information because, as you know, a lot of these companies do not really share all of their data. So the beginnings of Intel for us, we first called it, how do you measure a black hole, which is by the light and movement around it. And the idea was there is no single data source that is going to answer the questions the company has, or how do we reduce this information asymmetry gap. So the idea was like, but wait, if we start combining data sources, unifying data sources from many, many different angles, that is going to create that light and movement around these black holes, right? And then we call that, because obviously, again, with the language, right? So let's not call this measuring a black hole. Let's call it data for selling. How do we provide data to the agency that helps us sell projects, identify opportunities for our clients. And that was kind of like the entry point. So what we've done differently, and I think, this is obviously the way we thought coming from the outside. We didn't come from the traditional media and entertainment industry, right? So what I've noticed, there's a lot of focus on research inside media companies. Me and my team, we came in with the background of building data capabilities for very large corporations. And this was all about building data platforms, multidimensional cubes, and using machine learning to answer business questions, right? So once we understood what the business questions were, we realized, my goodness, we've never seen a more eclectic business than CAA, right? So if you work in a car company, well, then you're going to do, manufacturing and parts and supply chain, and it becomes very much that, but popularity, and it's in movies and TV and digital, and then there's music touring, and then there's like all these brand endorsements, and then there's like the variety of data is tremendous. So I keep telling people, I'm going to die of old age before we're done doing half of what the company needs to do. But the strategy of Intel was, we actually need a unified space where we can have an audience 360 that is unified with a talent 360, and this is all of data around them, and a buyer 360 and a project 360. So it's almost creating a multiverse of 360s that are unified so that I can traverse, almost like a cube that you can go back and forth. So I know, I have data around audiences, but also what's their purchase behaviors are, what are their consumptions that they have, what do they view, what are their brand affinities, what are their demographics. There's all kinds of data that combine together, which is what is the hard part, and all using data that everybody else has access to. The difference is that we've decided to ingest all of it and unify it in a data platform, which is really what makes it very unique, in that our data insights teams have access to data just, at their fingertips. We also open it up to the whole agency. So any agent, assistant, coordinator has access to our Intel platform in case they want to look up things very quickly. So it's definitely a supercharger in that regard, because the data is at everybody's fingertips and available to all.
And it's interesting, just to kind of go into, because that was such an interesting thing you said about measuring the light as it refracts around a black hole can give you information about the mass at the center of the black hole. Similarly, I imagine that, so if an artist has a 2% gross profit participation on the back end of a film, you can surmise what it meant to them in terms of their profitability on the film. If it's much higher than was anticipated, you then have the ability to negotiate more strongly for their role in the sequel. They can't come back and go, well, that movie barely made any money. We're doing you a favor by even calling you, if your artist is going to pass, we are not that bothered. And then you guys can presumably turn around and say, well, actually, we know this, and this. These three metrics allow us to game out how much you guys made from this movie, and I think you're more interested in making the sequel than you're letting on.
Yeah, and what's interesting is sometimes we get feedback from our agents that says, they dismissed the data, they didn't care about the data, but they renewed for season 4. Sometimes is knowing that we also know, right? And giving the enough information to an agent that's already an expert negotiator to have that confidence to know, actually, the size of this black hole is 3.2 times the size of this other black hole who made this much, right? So in the world that we live in, with not having complete transparency about performance of shows, we feel that providing these insights in multiple angles, right? That's kind of like the light around it, enriches the way our agency then negotiates, right, or identifies these opportunities. So it is literally, we might never close the information asymmetry gap entirely, because we don't have first-party data from each of the companies that we do business with, but we're closing it, right? Blindness at all. Like, our agents go in armed, with ammunition in terms of, I know the popularity of my client, right? I know the relative value they're providing to this particular show. We know the audiences that it's bringing you. Like, if you go to Amazon, we might not go in and say you're going to get more subscribers to Amazon Prime, but we're going to bring an audience that's going to buy more shoes. So what what does the buyer really want from a particular show? What are the audiences they're trying to reach? And we've been really, really good at that and very successful. Also demonstrating the value of clients helps us, our agents negotiate bigger, better deals. Also, parity of compensation when there's been disparity of compensation for particular clients. Knowing that just energizes our team so much because we know the impact it's doing, because it ends up with our clients, right? So they get the deal. They get their dream of renewing a season gets renewed, and we celebrate it as if we had been in the negotiating room because we know we participated. So we feel very connected in the work that we do, in the results that the agents get when they're doing, their business on behalf of our clients. It's really terrific.
When you sense check your data and the way that you're using it, how much of it is user first? How much of it is data first?
It is always user first. What is happening is the following. So imagine that, hypothetically speaking, the maturity level of the agency in terms of utilizing data and selling with data was, let's say, level 1, right? Which means that you can only ask level 1 questions. So in the beginning, we, as the data team, we kind of know a little bit more. So we can say, here's the art of the possible. You could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. We prototype some ideas in how we understand the business. So with a starting point, that co-design feedback loop begins because the agents are elite in what they do. So the moment they see, but could you do this? So I'll give you one example from our touring department, because one of the early prototypes we built was for the touring group, specifically our comedy department, with a good friend of mine who's the head of the comedy department, Matt Blake. This has actually been, he's written about this too, which is hilarious how he explains it versus how I remember it. But we were introduced when I was trying to understand how the touring group worked, because I had this idea that this is one place that I can visually show them something that they've never seen before. It was like a great opportunity. So I was introduced to Matt, and this is, my goodness, like over 10 years ago. So this is really embarrassing that it's so long ago. But he was forward thinking in terms of optimizing tours based on what he called recency, right? And how recent one of his act had played in a particular market, to not return to that market too soon, but to maximize ticket sales. And he was using a map with some red pins and yellow pins and green pins. And I came to him and I said, hey, you explain, what are you doing? He did explain exactly what he was trying to do. So again, user first, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he didn't know what the art of the possible was. So I said, hey, I can automate that. And then he said, no, you can't. And I said, yes, I can. And he said, no, you can't. And I said, yes, I can. And then he said, well, knock yourself out. So I came back literally like 2 days after that with an interactive map that was doing exactly what he was doing, without the red, green, yellow dots, right? And he said, well, let me explain to you how the red, green, yellow dots work and why. And I'm like, okay, you don't want to overfish the pond, right? So let's find out is it 12 months, 18 months, 36 months? What's the cutoffs? So I came back and all my heat map of dots around play dates came back red, green, yellow. And then he says, oh, that's really great, but can we do this by venue type? Okay, so let's add the venue type slicer, right? So it just started creating a feedback loop. And if you saw our Intell live touring system today, you'll get a heart attack. Like, we do radius clauses. It does the math to understand, let's not play within 50 miles of a market, but not further away than 300 miles, so that the driving of the trucks don't go beyond, guild agreements and so forth. It does recommendations of venues based on who you are and where you are in your career. So that's machine learning. A large language model is not going to be able to predict that. You need a different methodology for that. From knock yourself out, you can't automate this, to providing machine learning venue recommendations through multiple iterations, and then more agents get added and more of them start asking new questions. So what's happening is the maturity of the agency grows on every iteration of Intell, which means they ask better and bigger questions to us, which then forces us to, at some point we can say, well, we have the data, and if we don't have it, now we have to go search, like, who would have these kinds of data, right? So it is basically co-design. I would say it goes both ways. If we learn about a new methodology or a new tool, we would go back to the agents and say, hey, if we could do this, how would you use it? And then they would explain it to us, or say, yeah, I don't think maybe the timing is wrong, right? So we come to them with ideas, but I would say it's 80%, 80-20. It's demand driven from the agents and how they are trying to do their business. And the 20% of us is trying to expand that horizon a little bit so new ideas come in. When I interview these agents, I sometimes tell them, hey, if you had a magic wand and there were no technological constraints, what would you like to have from data? And sometimes they ask for things that we can do right away. They just don't know what the limits of our competencies and capabilities are. So sometimes it's just expanding, breaking a little bit of the potential understanding of our limits and just say, just ask and we will tell you when we can't, right? Versus, I don't think you can do it, right? It's been, we released Intel in 2018. If you saw Intel today versus what it was in 2018, you would almost say that it's a completely different app.
Yeah.
But it's that continuous evolution through feedback loops from every department. Music does it one way, motion pictures a different way, the brand group's a different way, the podcast group does it a different way, the books group. So all of that feedback loops means that kind of like this thing morphs and adjusts and adapts to the different needs of the different departments, quite specialized. And that's the power of Intel, is that it answers questions the way the agents ask them.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I have found quite beneficial about the generative AI sort of wave of interest is that what we're finding is a lot of people are coming to us asking for solutions that don't actually require AI, but they didn't think to ask, a little bit like you were saying about the agents, they just, the art of the possible, they didn't know to ask. And now that AI's come out, it seems anything is possible. So they ask the question that they've been sitting on for quite some time.
Now that we go back a little bit on generative AI, it's the same approach, right? So the agency comes back, is like, can you do, could this do this for us? Could it do this other thing for us? And we do have a data lab, right? So our data lab gets to do experiments, right? And one of our key values inside the data lab is a no sunk cost bias, right? So if something doesn't work, we're not going to double down and say, we have to make it work. If it doesn't work, we are very honest, open, and transparent and saying, it's not working, not the right tool, or not the right time, and let's pick another of the priorities, right? So when we experiment with generative AI, we're also very honest on the feedback. In fact, it's really funny. Like I have this one thing when I send our proof of concepts for testing to the agents, which this is what I love about this agency. I go into a department head and I say, hey, I would like a couple of volunteers to help us build a solution where we're going to be inserting generative AI. And then I get 15 agents. I don't get two. I get like 15, and that is fantastic because the more people that touch it, the variety of feedback is just invaluable to us. And we're very honest. And when I send these guidelines on how to test, I literally say the very first bullet point says the AI is guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
With that mindset, because everybody who works with LLMs in detail knows that they're error prone, they make stuff up. The buzzword is hallucinations, but for data scientists, those are errors, just like prediction errors.
You once explained to me as well as the difference between a bullshitter and a liar.
Exactly. So, a liar knows he or she is lying because the goal and objective is to deceive, right? A bullshitter tells you stuff, with conviction, may or not know if it's true or not. I just believe that, right? So they'll just bullshit you. And there's I think there's articles and books about how LLMs, some people call them bullshit machines. I think they have a lot more value than people give them, but less value than it's promised.
Well, their primary job is to give you an answer you're happy with. So if you walk away with bad information, but you're happy, the LLM feels like it's done its job.
Yeah, but sometimes you also need the truth. And if you are not getting the truth, I would not feel comfortable an agent taking what could be a bullshit answer into a negotiation. Because what is my A-list client going to think if, let's say, if we did a script summary that made 3 characters up and my client who's a writer, let's say a writer client talks to our agent and says, what did you think about my script? And my agent talks about these 3 characters that are made up and they don't appear on a script. That relationship's over forever, right? Number one, why didn't you actually read my script? right? So when we do these kinds of,
And then even worse, why did you pretend to me you had? That's the relationship breaker there. It's you pretended to me. You were false.
so by saying the AI is guilty until proven innocent, if we are working on script summaries, for instance, there is no universe where you have not read the script. The job
That's one of the
is,
places that you and I always agreed on from day
yes,
one, is that the tool that
exactly.
we built, Kubrick, we always say when we calculate the amount of time it saves and everything else, we always say we do not calculate this reading time. You must read the screenplay.
Exactly. And this is why we connected with you so well, because of that alignment of understanding of where does these types of tools add value to the workflow, right? It's not, oh, look, I did a summary. It's like, no, no, no. What's the actual job, right? So I appreciate that very much. And this is why we got connected, I even think 2 years ago, like time is flying.
Yeah, I know.
But by saying the AI is guilty until proven innocent, I'm also, how are you going to know if it's guilty or not guilty if you haven't read the script, right? So that's number one. Number two, in the outputs that we generate it in, in CAA templates, and we added a couple of things. The EU AI Act has a requirement that you have to openly, if something is generated synthetically, you have to say this output was generated with an AI assistant. So we add that in the output. This output has been generated by the, CAA assistant. And then the next line says, approved by or edited by, and then an agent name. If there is no agent name, I would not trust it, right? If there's an agent name, and let's say Orlando, you're the agent, and you put in your name and, approved and edited by Orlando, and a year later, I pick up this summary because in some search situation, you might find this script popping up. Somebody's looking for aliens, movies somewhere, blah, 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 comedy. And then the script shows up and it says Orlando approved it. Then I could give you a call. Hey, Orlando, you read this script and I think there's an opportunity for us, versus not knowing if anybody validated. And then, do you trust it, right? So that's 100%. The thing, right? So we have to tie in these things. So there's always a human in the loop, especially with LLMs. Anybody listening to the podcast, if you're using LLMs and you are not having a human validating, the error rates are pretty high. If you had an employee that gave you errors 20, 30% of the time, you'll be firing them, right? So just be super careful in terms of how do you manage the validation of the outputs of these LLMs is really important. So for us, it's kind of like the human in the loop has always been centered. This is what we called it co-design. This is what we're always really involved with the agents, so that the LLMs or machine learning or Intel never deviates from what the agents need to do for their clients, right? That's really, really important.
How do you guys, with all of the uncertainty, how do you guys help artists navigate this new world? I mean, it seems that not only are there massive shifts happening in terms of where consumers and audiences are watching their things, where the shifts in technology, but shifts in technology across the board. I mean, VO3 just came out that has the ability to not just remake a person, but also dialogue, also diegetic sound. You've got the ability to clone voices. You've got the ability to clone writing styles. Seems like technology suddenly is this all fronts attack. What's your guys' role in protecting artists in that space from these sorts of threats?
Yeah, so by staying really close with these big tech companies and understanding their roadmaps and then their plans. I mentioned earlier, the work, one of our groups inside the CA the company, our strategic development group, is extremely focused, and specifically what you're just asking about, by being really connected with this whole tech ecosystem of what's coming, able to feedback back into the agency and to the agents for them to communicate to managers, to lawyers, to artists themselves. Hey, this is coming. This is what it means for you. If you want to opt out, here's a link. So there is a lot of communication that our group collaborates with this strategic development group in terms of bringing that information of what's going on the outside very quickly inside the agency, so that the agents can communicate it out to their clients and the people that are around our clients as well. So it's a lot of information sharing when it comes to what's happening specifically on generative AI. We've also, our clients see our outputs from Intel. A lot of the reports that we provide, they see them. I've heard them talk about our data work, like in podcasts or somewhere else. And I'm like, oh, a client literally talks about the data work we've done with such passion, and like sometimes even better than
It's
I would.
powerful. It's an incredible tool for them to have in their arsenal. It must feel very comforting for them to know that
It's
that work's being done.
wonderful. I think when they see it, they're blown away. Like, I didn't know these things. Like, I remember doing we were doing a presentation about a touring client to the manager. And there are many times where agents basically tell us, hey, I have a production company, client of mine, they want to understand, about their projects. So we bring them into the office. We put Intel on a big screen, and they just go into the screen and start strategizing. They talk to each other. All we do is just click around and they interact. There's like 3 producer buddies that have a production company. They start looking at the data. Can it show me this? And can you show me that? And that interaction is also inputs for us. This is how clients think about it, the changes that we could make.
Imagine that's a huge reason that you guys have probably the least amount of churn in terms of clients than any other agency. I would imagine that if you're going like, this is the level on which they understand everything I do on a daily basis and how it works, you're not going to leave that place, are you?
Well, I can't take credit for that. I can tell you CAA
Please, Andre, take credit for it.
Magnificent platform where we're just a little part of that, right? So in our strategies, it's interesting. Like I created what would be the similar of like a startup kind of like a investment deck, and I have a slide that has what's the, where that we play in the value chain of CAA, right? So, and one of them is actually that stickiness, where it's not only stickiness for clients, but also for agents, right? So if we are able to provide the services to our agents that then serve our clients the best way possible, that retention mechanism is just amplified, right? So the platform itself is humongous. The data just adds to that in addition to, right? So obviously, thank you for the compliment, but I think it's definitely powerful when we've heard agents tell us when they've won a project because they brought the data. We started calling it that one of our specialties is turning a no into a yes. Right? So the initial response is like, I'm not sure we can do this, or we're not going to do it. And then we bring the data, and then it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do it, right? So turning no's to yeses, getting a better understanding of the value of our clients' work just lifts everybody up. Right? And that's very rewarding in itself. So you saying that's really wonderful too. Thank you.
Well, pleasure. I only say it because it's true. But yeah, I mean, I think that, it seems to me that you guys are quite safe actually in this new world of democratized craft making. The more artists that there are out there, the more storytellers that there are out there. If somebody creates something truly phenomenal out of their bedroom in Wisconsin, you guys are still the place that those artists will come for representation. And it seems to me that it's only going to be more important what you do with all of this technological change on the creator side.
For sure. I think opportunities only get amplified with more ways for artists to showcase their art and tell their stories. I think we just need to make sure that, artists are always going to have to make sure that they monetize their work, and they're well represented and not, taken advantage of. They're not necessarily data scientists. They're not lawyers themselves. They're not agents themselves. And I think the role CAA plays is to make sure to take care of them in a complicated business world when they are basically artists, right? So I see our job in the data team kind of like supporting that as well, telling them, they might get some stats around video views or engagement, and they might get 90 days worth of data. But how does that relate to everybody else? Indexing across similar other audiences, and we can enrich a lot of that information so that they feel like well taken care of and themselves come up with new ideas and new opportunities to tell bigger and better stories out there as well. I'm looking forward to see what the next looks like, right? So imagine before there were creators today, they were called, influencers, and they were like in social media influencer space, and we have a whole digital team focusing on them. What's Darman gonna be doing next, right? So all kinds of really interesting things that are net new only 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago. And now with this technology, what's next going to show up? Are we going to be looking at more of the vertical type of mini, things that are happening in LATAM today? There's like, telenovelas in the shape of a mobile phone. So more mediums, more opportunity. I think our clients will push us to where they need us to be. That's where we benefit from their inventions and their creativity, and we are there to support them.
Yeah. I just have one more question that I've been asking everybody, which is, I had a great boss named Dan Wyden, who was a giant in the advertising world. And he had a quote where he said, "You're useless to me unless you fucked up big at least twice." And so can you remember, and would you be willing to admit a time where you messed up and what you learned from it?
Well, if I could use something that really helped me in my career, I would have to rewind time a little bit further back than CAA, because that's really helped me tremendously. I remember my passion for data has been going on for, 25 years, right? And I was in management consulting in a company called PA Consulting Group. They are actually the ones that brought me from Denmark to the US in 2001. And I remember receiving an RFP for a company who wanted to do data strategy, roadmap, planning. They wanted to build a data team inside their company. And coming from Denmark and reading a lot of the, responses that I saw from competition and stuff like that, and I'm like, wow, Americans really not ever tell you the answer. They just kind of like tell you enough so that you call them back, right? And I said, how about I actually give them the answer in my response to their RFP? And I took a chance and I wrote literally, what you need to do is this, this, this. I gave them the answer, right? Because why are they asking for a consulting firm? It might be because they can't do it themselves. So me giving them the answer, it's great. So we got the job. The CIO of this company was blown away. He says, the first time I get an RFP response that actually tells me what you're going to do. All the other ones seem to just be vague, and I don't know how to pick, but yours stood out literally because you told me the answer. And I was like, well, yeah, let's get this done. So I win the job. Couldn't be happier. I have goosebumps telling you this story. And I show up on the Monday, and on the Tuesday, he tells me, hey, I'm going to change jobs. I got an opportunity at a different company. This was the sponsor of the project, right? Well, André was very, very excited about this job. And inside I said, ooh, we need to pause this project because I don't know who the next CIO is, what's the sponsorship situation. But I was blinded by the success of have sold this project in such a unique way that I just said, no, we're just going to get going. And very painful project because there was no sponsorship, there was no CIO for a while, access to the people I needed wasn't really great. The team that we built to do this delivery were working almost like chickens without a head. And 8 weeks after that, I don't even think anybody read the output of that project, right?
No.
So what I learned from that is the importance of the sponsorship from the business side that drives whatever you're trying to do. If they're lost, you're basically just floating around, Yes, did I invoice? For sure. Did they pay? I guess there was a job code and it was in their AP system, so we got paid. But the fact that we just meandered, I would consider that a huge screw up. But what I learned from there was, okay, don't be stubborn, number one. Just because you're so proud of the project that you are in, but the importance of that business sponsorship. And that is really what I did also at CAA. The first thing, if I were going to do data, I better have the CFO on my side, the president of the company, the CEO of the company, the department heads, the agency board, the managing directors. I have them all join a data steering committee every month. They all know what we're doing. Whenever there is something, I go to them and I say, hey, we need resources, or hey, there's a conflict between these two departments. What should be the priority? That sponsorship is what made Intel a success. But I think I learned to build sponsorship because of that screw up.
Yeah, I think it also feeds into one of the talents I've noticed about you. You're very good at explaining, what's going on. You're also incredibly personable as well. And I think that is kind of what what we've really appreciated. And I think that, from my perspective, I think artists should be very confident in you and how you react to things. I've been, one of the reasons I've been so excited to talk to you. I think that your ethics in the face of everything that's going on right now, I think really sets you apart. And
I think a big difference too is not being a data tech company. I'm not out there selling dashboards or selling the latest LLM wrapper. I'm here to serve an agency that serves incredible talent. So that North Star that we started with, literally, we serve this A-list superstar client that's my boss, as a North Star, really settles the whole team, and we really leave we take care of each other, good things happen. It's basically the strategy of the company is the strategy of a data team. And our team, has been together now 8 years. Like it's the same group, and it's only been growing as the competency and capability has grown in the company. So yeah, it's a blast, to be honest, to be here.
Well, on that note, I won't take up any more of your time. I so appreciate you sitting down with us, and it's been fascinating for me, and I just really enjoy talking to you.
Same here, and let's keep doing more good stuff together.
Absolutely. That sounds
All
great.
right.
Thanks so much, Andre. Have
My
a good one.
pleasure. Take care.